All right, hey, it's Joel from The Hack Life. I'm here with Owen Monroy. We're here in Walnut Creek, California at Oxygen Rally. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for making the trip.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. And something that's cool that not everybody knows is, and I hope they go watch the video, is that you just put me through a 15-minute workout on your machine. So we're definitely going to talk about that. But I think just to start things off, just can you kind of tell everybody, your journey into this health and fitness world? I know for me, just into the world of biohacking and health and wellness, a lot of people find their path through struggles and stuff. So I always find it interesting to learn about, how did you get here? How did you get into this optimization world?
Yeah, I was coaching volleyball for about 9 years in the NCAA. And so that was my former career. I mentioned to you I was a music business major, and so I moved into volleyball after playing in college. And
so you played collegiate volleyball?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, at Messiah College in Pennsylvania. And so, I moved on from that and started coaching and really fell in love with teaching. I was like the last person that people thought would be a teacher,
Why?
Compared to my siblings. I had siblings that were really patient and really good with kids. It wasn't that I was bad with kids, but I was, I'm kind of a perfectionist in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so I didn't always have the patience to I had only had enough patience for myself to figure it out. But when I fell into some mentorship situations where I was able to learn from Olympic level volleyball coaches, it completely changed my paradigm on learning, but also then on teaching. And I realized I love to teach because I had a framework where I feel like I could offer people a pathway to changing their skill set. And so that's what got me into volleyball. And then that was about 9 years that I did that professionally. And that's what brought me to the Bay Area originally. I was coaching at Penn State as the volunteer assistant there, and then got hired out here at St. Mary's College. And so I was coaching beach and indoor volleyball at St. Mary's, and then eventually ended up at University of Illinois, so I'm back across the country, and then most recently at Cal Berkeley, beach and indoor volleyball. So that was my former career, and it can be a pretty intense lifestyle, especially during the fall. But you've got recruiting, and it's a year round. It's pretty scripted in terms of you're in a rhythm of traveling and working with a team season after season. And so during that time, I really started kind of feeling my limits in terms of performance, mental performance within that framework. And for me, that started, I grew up, my mom and dad were very progressive in terms of alternative health. And so, I grew up and was a vegan for a while.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I'm not anymore. But my mom had a lot of exploration in terms of alternative health. And so,
so cool.
Growing up, examples I was eating, my dad's from Guatemala, so avocados were commonplace, in our family. And so if I would, have a lunch and, schoolmates would be looking at what is guacamole? What is that?
Where's your fruit roll-up at, bro?
Yeah. But at that time, that stuff was not commonplace. Now it's at Subway, it's everywhere. But it's people know what baba ganoush is now. And I had that stuff, growing up because my mom was really tabbouleh and all, Mediterranean stuff. And so, but even fasting, my dad was working on a health issue when I was growing up, and he was fasting, doing extended fasting. Yeah. And so, as a young person, I was interested in it. I wasn't doing water fast per se, but it was a juice fast or, red apples only.
Even as a kid?
Yeah. Just because, it wasn't extended. And it was always just because I was interested. I wonder if, what would it feel like? My dad's doing, 3 days a week or whatever. And so it's planted that question of well, maybe I don't need to eat today. And so that's pretty unique at a young age.
Yeah, it is.
And I was homeschooled. And so I got to explore a lot of different areas, fly fishing and stuff was a passion growing up, and really just made me
so cool.
A learner, and willing to research and explore things on my own. And so anyway, coaching volleyball, as I started questioning, hey, I don't feel like I'm performing as well as I could. Cognitively, and then just physically, it's hey, I don't have as much time to exercise, or I'm not taking the time, maybe is a better way to put it.
This is when you're as a coach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, working at in the Big Ten coaching volleyball, it's pretty intense, you know,
I bet.
5 hours a night and, you know, up late watching tape,
Whoa.
you know, and so you're in front of a screen until the minute, you know, you hit the pillow, and then you're up early in the morning at practice, and then it's a pretty intense schedule. And so that, you know, helped me feel into my limits. And I wasn't, not only in terms of performance, but happiness. I wasn't where I wanted to be physically, mentally. And so that really started a journey of me taking ownership of that. And I did have some background and some skills to say, hey, like, start asking some pretty relevant questions about diet, about sleep. And so I started kind of digging into that. And as I did, I just started, I think really one of the first things I decided to re-engage was, I mean, I ate really well all growing up. I went to college and it was like, I'm at a cafeteria. Like I can't, it was just too much to be so focused on that at that time in my life. So I kind of just let go of the reins and eat whatever. I was still conscious. I wasn't.
Yeah.
But, so to re-engage, that was like the first step was like, I just made a commitment to myself. I'm going to like turn over and read the label. Like I'm going to know what's in it. I'm going to start just learning about that.
Yeah. Started building awareness back into your health.
Yeah. No real rules around what I was doing, but it was like, hey, I'm going to start doing this. That was like a first step. And from there I started experimenting with low carb and keto stuff. You know, that was 4 or 5 years ago that, maybe a little longer than that I was starting to play with like, okay, how do these variables affect my everyday well-being?
Yeah.
And so in that journey, I started digging in, and I actually was part of the Bulletproof coaching program years ago. And
Me too.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that was kind of for me too. 2016 New York is where I was at.
Okay, so I think I was 2017 New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
So perfect.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so I started that, and that assisted with that process of like how I was, you know, diving into it. You know, that wasn't a centerpiece in my experience, honestly. But that was a part of my exploration. And I really, my departure from coaching collegiate volleyball was really based in wanting to share some of the things I was discovering with other people, and realizing that in the collegiate athletics scene, I wasn't allowed to do that. Like we had a nutritionist on staff. We had, you know, people on staff that were in positions too, and they were professionals. And so the liability side is like, I can't tell.
Who are you?
Yeah.
A bulletproof coach telling
Well, I mean, I wasn't even a bulletproof
Okay.
coach. You know, it was just more like, hey, you have autoimmune things going on your team, and you know that stuff is real, and it affects a huge portion of the population. And not being able to offer any even suggestions, not even like guidance really, but just like, hey, have you thought about
gag order, huh, for you guys?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
Wow.
because the liability is too great if that player
makes
then
sense. That's a lot of money going to that college lost or whatever.
Yeah, and you don't want, you know, people can claim really quickly that the downstream effects, whether it be an eating disorder or whatever, you know, if you chime in with suggestions, it's just not really the place for that. And so it really started weighing on me. Like, I want to share the stuff that is having a positive impact on me, and I wanted to broaden my impact in that way. And so long-term collegiate volleyball wasn't where I wanted to be. I soon realized, and I started exploring and started helping people, you know, from a lifestyle coaching standpoint. Because I had done so much exploration and had a skill set that I felt like I could offer some help there. And so that's when I first found the LiveO2, the oxygen system that I use, and I've built my brand Oxygen Rally around that.
Love it. So you discover LiveO2, which is essentially, it's just for everybody that doesn't know what LiveO2 is, I'm going to say it's a bike with some oxygen contraption.
Well, it's not a bike.
So that's what I was going to ask you. That's what we did today.
Yeah.
And what I've seen in the past when I've done it at the Bulletproof Conference, it was on a bike. So, but you could do it on any kind of, well, I know you're going to say, I was going to say you could do it on any kind of cardiovascular machine, but you're going to say to me, you don't even need a machine. That's probably what you're going to
Yeah, you don't need a machine. I think you want a machine, though.
Yeah.
Like, you want some type of cardio. I know people who do it with bands, or do it with kettlebell, or do it with just body weight movements, which is fine. But really, for me, the best way to experience it is on a cardio machine. The system itself is basically separating room air, filtering it, and separating it for to concentrated oxygen, and then low oxygen. So the low oxygen side essentially is, set to 13 to 14% oxygen, which is the equivalent of 11,000 feet. So you have super oxygen on one side and then the low oxygen on the other.
And so you can transition people from a high altitude state to a super oxygenated state.
Yeah.
That contrast.
Yeah.
Basically.
And so that contrast is the feature, and the feature that I appreciate most is that quick switch, allowing the user to take ownership of the session and really start to explore the limits of their aerobic system, the limits of their heart and lungs, just based on feel, because it's a pretty tangible experience to have a switch that takes you from a refreshing environment in which you can produce more power to an environment that immediately, it's like carrying the groceries in when you're up in Tahoe, like you feel a difference.
Yeah.
A flight of stairs feels different at altitude than here at sea level.
There's so much science, and I've heard so many different things. People, I guess my question to you is, why even have a machine like this? Why not just, couldn't I just go live in Tahoe for 5 months or something and then go fight in the MMA and a UFC fight or something? Or is there an advantage, I guess, because you're doing the switching, like you're saying, you're switching from the high altitude to the super saturated oxygen. Is there any science backing this, or is there anything that you've seen just anecdotally, like, no, this is a good thing, this contrast is powerful?
I mean, well, if you look at the science around, altitude, I mean, that's pretty clear. That's been the research around that is extensive and have been around for decades. On the
and by the way, I always hear, I don't know if you know, but do you want to is it live high, train low, or?
That's kind of the thing that, that rings in a lot of people's minds is like, hey, that's a tradition of like live high, train low. And why would we want to train low? Well, we're going to be able to build strength better at sea level.
Yeah.
That's traditionally, that's how we think about it. And at altitude, we're going to build our blood, for endurance. And so there's limits to both environments, in terms of going to altitude has a real effect. And I always say altitude, it's hypoxic training, but if you're not in it every day and saying it can take you for a spin, whether it's hyperoxic or hypoxic. And so I usually just say altitude.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or high oxygen for the other side.
Yeah.
But even those terms can get really confusing because high oxygen is high oxygen, but it's not high altitude, right?
Right.
So
right.
So if you catch me saying one or the other, please help me clarify.
I'll be sure to correct you. Don't worry. Yeah.
But what was your question? Train high, live low.
Yeah. So I mean, there's that.
I see. You even said it backwards.
Yeah.
Live high.
Live high, train low. I mean, you always hear about that. I think that's the preferred method, correct? Is to do that. So when you had me on the machine, I was here for 15 minutes. You were switching me back and forth. Is this sort of hack? Is this like hacking me so that I don't have to spend so much time living? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
in some ways, you could think of it as like we're going to take that cycle, and I'm not an exercise scientist in terms of like the mechanisms of the long-term adaptations, but in terms of the experience of you on the bike, we're taking that train high or train low, live high, and we're shrinking that down into a really short period of time.
15 minutes, guys. Yeah, I was on the bike for 15 minutes. I mean, it was awesome, by the way. I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But
so if you were at altitude and you go up 3 flights of stairs, you're still at altitude and you still have to recover at altitude. If you have the switch on the bike, you can do that work and then recover and then go do that work again and then recover. And you're going to recover quicker because you have access to 4 times normal sea level oxygen.
Okay, so perfect.
So it's a rapid recovery. So you can think of it as rapid recovery for altitude training. That's one way to think about it.
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, it's really efficient, and you can train at altitude at sea level, and you can recover even quicker than if you were at sea level. Because technically, if we just had an altitude generator, we could get that altitude effect, come back to room air, and it's going to help us recover faster than if we were truly at altitude. So that is contrast therapy in and of itself. Now the elevated level of oxygen is going to enhance that, but that's the principle.
Okay. What are and this is referred to as EWOT training, right?
EWOT really just encapsulates. I mean, it stands for exercise with oxygen therapy or exercise with oxygen training. But really that's just the oxygen side. That's supplemental oxygen. And
now, okay, so there's some devices out there that just do that, I think, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty commonplace. A lot of people rig up stuff, but the real like I'm saying, the contrast is really the unique aspect to
that's like the bang for your buck, right? That's like where you're getting your money's worth per se.
Yeah, and the more advanced you get, the less you rely on the super oxygen, but it also depends on your goals. If you're looking to develop your peak power, you might use the supplemental oxygen side a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're just working on a health issue. And so if I'm working on endurance, I'm not going to spend all my time on super oxygen. I'm going to actually lean on at the altitude side quite a bit more.
Yeah. So what I think the big thing is then what are clients seeing? What are people that are walking through your doors? What are the effects they're seeing, or athletes or anybody, again, I just went for 15 minutes, but I mean, are you seeing people, what are some of the results that they're getting?
It's fun because, and I always lower expectations because.
Especially when I walked in, right? Just kidding.
No, I always lower people's expectations in terms of like, what is this going to do for me? And I always dial back and say, all right, well, movement is medicine, right? Like I can say that and everyone like, yeah, when you move, it helps us detoxify, moving blood, moving lymph, those systems are meant to detoxify us and help us maintain health. It helps energize us, right? And so just if we can agree on movement is medicine, exercise is this really beneficial thing for our health. And so what people can expect, I'd point to, hey, you have 70,000 miles of veins, arteries, and capillaries. And so for me to say, this is how it's going to help you, Joel, right here in this muscle or this joint, we're going to see it change. That would be a bit audacious for me to say, even if I was a doctor.
Yeah.
And so when we think about your cardiovascular system as that giant, your cardiovascular system has enough mileage to wrap around the globe 3 times.
Yeah.
70,
awesome.
It's crazy. And so with that in mind, we can then go start exploring with this and say, hey, can we increase circulation and help? That's a super highway to deliver nutrients to your tissues. Like that oxygen is a nutrient that your body requires to produce energy.
Right.
And so if we're increasing nutrient delivery throughout the body, systems are going to be upgraded, right? And the way in which it impacts you is going to be different than it impacts me, because you might have different deficits. You might have a different history of injury. You might have a shoulder thing going on or something in your liver that responds differently, vital organs, and we might see a different upgrade happen in you than would happen for me. So
yeah,
it's a little bit, I always lower the expectations that way, but on the other side, I really encourage awareness for people. So I had a client come in and she booked a 3-session intro and got off on her first session, and she was going out. She was like, hey, is it possible that like my neck pain could have gone away because of this? And I was like, and again, we'd already talked about like circulation, and I was like, yeah, it actually is quite possible that when you improve circulation, you relieve some even local inflammation to an area of your body that's struggling. And so I was like, well, like next few sessions, let's follow up and, let me know how that feels. And she came back and she's like, well, I slept through the night,
Nice.
And normally I wake up like 5 times, and
Whoa.
I wake up and I'm groggy and I feel like I've been up all night. And so in the series of her 8-session series, her sleep just kept on getting better. And
what did she initially come in for?
She came in for exercise.
Yeah, and she got all these other downstream effects.
Yeah, and she was interested in, it seems to have some other benefits. Like it is a new thing to people, and it's a technology. So people bring this expectation to a technology because maybe this can be the difference,
Right. This is the magic pill.
But ultimately, we're breathing and we're moving, and so we're enhancing some of those things. But I never like to be all about the technology, because you take a lot of breaths every day, and people everyone's going to be different. Your respiratory rate is different than my respiratory rate, but if we can change your breath, the way in which you're breathing, that's the most vital touch point. You're vital daily touch point in how you're interfacing with your environment.
Yeah.
And so anyway, over 8 sessions, her neck pain really just went away.
Yeah.
She said it went from a 10 to maybe like a 2 or a 3.
Wow. The fact that she's sleeping every night is huge.
Yeah, and it really is. And she was in the, age bracket of, I think 50 plus,
Yeah.
And there's actually a little testimonial of her talking about it on my Instagram, on one of the highlights. But it was really cool. That was unexpected for her, unexpected for me. I mean, it was pain she had for a decade.
Yeah.
Because of her,
that's amazing.
Her work. But so that's an example. But other people see I've had an old guy get off the bike. He came down for a demo because he was thinking about buying one. So that's one thing I do hear. People that are interested in buying one, they come in and get a demo or a 3-part experience. Mm-hmm. He came in and he was like feeling good, and he did it and got off the bike, and he's like he was looking out these windows here, and he's taking his glasses off and putting them back on. He's like, I can read the signs across the street. And I'm like, whoa, like that's pretty cool. And he's like, is it possible that? And I was like, yeah, maybe. Yeah. And actually the visual aspect is the thing that I noticed first, because I wasn't managing any, specific health issues, but I was playing tennis pretty regularly, and I'm not an extremely good tennis player, but I played enough that I know my game.
Yeah.
And I'm learning it, and so I'm pretty dialed into my learning process. And then I didn't play tennis for maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks because I got this, and I was doing sessions, and I was working on the business. And then I went back to tennis, and it was like every stroke got one level better. And that's where it wasn't like, oh, I'm having a good forehand day. Sweet. 'Cause that happens all the time. Like for me as a low level tennis player, oh, I'm having a good forehand day, but my backhand sucks. And the next time it's like, well, my backhand is great. And then this is struggling. But since after spending those 3-4 weeks initially doing a lot of sessions, it was like everything was just a little bit better. And so I was asking about that, and I was like, it's like my visual acuity kind of just took a little jump up.
Interesting.
And if you think about like the mitochondrial density of the eye,
they require
a
lot.
Yeah, of the heart, of the brain consumes a huge portion of the oxygen that we consume. And so if you think of it from that standpoint, it's like, well, that kind of makes sense. And so, that's one thing I've noticed. I'm trying to think of some other examples of, there was a guy here that he was really motivated and did a lot of sessions in a short period of time, which generally helps jumpstart that. So I get people started with a little more intense schedule, and then they taper off in terms of
like what maintenance kind of mode.
Yeah, what fits for their lifestyle. But he was a tracker, and he kept track of everything, and he was just his mood, everything that he manually tracked, everything was increasing. And so sleep scores is one that oftentimes improves. People that wear an Oura ring or something like that.
Yeah.
I rented a system to a guy and it was.
I'll have to track my sleep tonight.
Yeah, people notice that, but it could go the other way. You could, because the detox potential, you could be really restless. And so
now, why would there be a detox potential? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so
so just so everybody knows, we did a 15-minute session today where I'm saturating my body with oxygen as I'm pedaling on a bike, I don't know if before we talk about the detox, can you kind of explain? I don't think we even really delved in because you just you're kind of downplaying it. You're like, oh, just movement is medicine, which I agree with. Yeah. But don't sell yourself short. I mean, what we're doing here is, because I remember when we did on the bike, you were explaining how like the capillaries and everything's getting more oxygenated. So there's so I'm on the bike, I'm pedaling, and I'm saturating my blood with this oxygen, and then you take it away from me, and I go into this altitude state, or hypoxic state, and now I'm still pedaling, and then you would rev it back up. So there's back and forth. So first, can you just kind of explain, maybe like on a biological level?
Yeah, sure.
Why, I think you explained something about the hemoglobin and getting, more oxygen. And then we can talk about the detox and why some people might get that effect.
Yeah, so, the blood chemistry is really important to this discussion, because most people, if you wear a pulse oximeter, most people will be from 96 to 100. And, that's pretty fully saturated. That's kind of standard. Now, if you we'll just use the flight of stairs for an example. If you go up 1 or 2 flights of stairs, your breath pattern probably changes, right? And if you put the pulse oximeter on at the top of that flight of stairs, oftentimes you'll see you're still at 98%. or 97%, but your respiratory rate has changed a lot. Your body is compensating for this stress that you've introduced. And so what you'll realize is that your body isn't responding to a lack of oxygen. You're carrying a lot of oxygen in your blood. Your body is responding to the buildup of CO2. Your metabolism is working. You're producing energy to get up that flight of stairs. And so you have more CO2 in your blood. And if you're not CO2 tolerant, you're going to need to huff and puff and get rid of some of the CO2. And so when you do so, you'll kind of find your comfort level again. Okay. But what we really try to do and educate people around is, hey, we can actually become more efficient at utilizing the oxygen that's already in the blood. And so a little bit of desaturation in response to activity, if you're breathing appropriately, may happen. And so getting back to why that's important is, well, if we can improve your CO2 tolerance, you're moving, you're exercising, your body is producing energy to meet the stress, then you can breathe more steadily. You don't need to hyperventilate. And people think of ventilating as like a panic attack, right? That is an example. But there's more low-level hyperventilation that happens. It's basically, is your breath inappropriate for the activity? So when you go up a flight of stairs and you're with someone who's super fit and they're not breathing and you might be like, I feel like a little self-conscious, why am I breathing so hard?
Yeah.
But, so that's what I would say, hey, you're breathing inappropriately for the activity level, right? And so if that's the case, then what is the blood chemistry of that? And the CO2 tolerance that's where CO2 tolerance comes in. So, and we can talk about what actually is happening there. The Bohr effect, if you've heard of the Bohr effect.
Yeah. I know there's Patrick McCowan talks a lot about the oxygen advantage.
Yeah.
Buteyko breathing. But I mean, explain that for everybody, because I could get
that book has been foundational to my exploration of breathing, nasal breathing being part of that, and CO2. The Bohr effect. If you Google it, you'll find a bunch of videos, people on the whiteboard drawing the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. But the problem with even just that phrase, it's like it feels like, how am I going to understand this whole thing when that phrase is just intimidating to most people to begin with? But the way I like to just describe it is, in the presence of CO2, oxygen becomes less sticky to the hemoglobin. Okay, and hemoglobin is the protein, the oxygen binding protein in the red blood cell. Okay, so if you think about when we're breathing, if I am breathing in through my nose, out through my nose, calmly, I'm at a pretty comfortable state. When I start huffing and puffing, my body is essentially in oxygen collection mode. We're trying to collect and deliver oxygen, but the problem is we've already exceeded our comfort or sustainable capacity, right? So in order to collect oxygen, we get rid of CO2, which makes oxygen more sticky to the hemoglobin. Mm-hmm. So I'm in collection mode when I'm I need to get more oxygen, deliver it, and get back to recovery. Homeostasis. But if I'm in working mode, I can be breathing very evenly and building up CO2 in the blood to a point where oxygen is released to the tissues. And so it becomes less sticky to the hemoglobin, so it can now be released to the working tissues, the vital organs.
So when you're doing this on the machine, then I'm assuming that's what's happening too. It's becoming less sticky, right? You're delivering oxygen in places that it may not.
It can be, but that's where it's interesting. Is in almost any situation, you can choose to hyperventilate and outpace the stimulus, right? And so that's where I really encourage people to, even system aside, is are you training or are you performing? Because the way we breathe, very often we're performing, and we might think, well, it's not game day. I'm not. But what is the stage that you're performing on? You might be performing if you're in a gym for the people next to you, your ego, how you match up with the people around you.
Yeah.
If you're out on a run by yourself, you might be performing against your own ego in terms of hey, I want to kick ass. I want to perform here. But in reality, that may not serve your training purpose.
Yeah.
And so going at a pace in which you're building CO2 and maintaining CO2 and improving your oxygen efficiency, the release of oxygen to the tissues, may offer you more benefits than pushing your capacity and just over breathing, overcompensating. Because I've worked with really high level athletes that, and we've done metabolic tests on them, and they have a high VO2. They can perform, but their breath patterns are really stressful.
Interesting.
Like they're carrying stress up here, and when they're breathing hard, they're essentially professional overcompensators.
Yes.
And so, that's where I think I'm trying to return to your initial question there, but the CO2 tolerance is essential, and really making a decision. Am I going to go out and train on this run, or am I performing? That, to me, that distinction is really important, because then it kind of corners your ego and it's like, what am I performing for? I actually want to get better at this. This isn't game day, and I want to improve my efficiency.
Yeah. I love that. And then talk about the detox effect that you can get from doing, from doing the bike with the oxygen here at Oxygen Raleigh.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about inflammation in the cardiovascular system, I mean, I'm not going to speak to inflammation, from a medical standpoint, but just, I know that when I eat Chinese food, like my ring size changes, right?
Interesting.
Right. Or like I can finish a certain meal and say, did I just gain 2 pounds? Like, no, I didn't gain 2 visible pounds. There's something going on in my tissue that's not great, right?
Yeah.
And it's whether it's love handles, hear Dave Asprey talk about like muffin top of your brain, right? And so kind of tuning into that and saying, hey, what's being disrupted here? I don't know. I just like to think from a very low level standpoint, layperson standpoint. Inflammation in the cardiovascular system can result in limited blood flow, right? And so when we limit blood, if you think about your capillary beds, right? And so in the changeover from, you have a single blood cell squeezing through the opening from one side to the other, right? If that gets inflamed, that red blood cell might not be able to pass through that same capillary, right? And so blood gets rerouted around. And so whatever's downstream of that lack of circulation is kind of what we call a brownout. You're lacking circulation to the downstream side. And so if we increase movement, we've got more of a heartbeat going. So we're increasing the pressure at which we're pumping blood through that area. And then also we're increasing the oxygen in the blood water, the plasma. So what can't fit through that capillary is a red blood cell, but what can is blood, the plasma of the blood. And so as we increase oxygen in the tissues, even at the capillary level, we can relieve some of that inflammation and restore circulation of the red blood cells.
Yeah.
And so that's how it's been explained to me. And, when we restore blood flow, we're going to wash out some sludge, some metabolic waste from the cardiovascular system that's maybe just been stopped up there. And it could be temporary. I mean, the older you are, the more potential you have because you've been exposed to more, suboptimal diet, pollution, even stress. Stress can be, a vasoconstriction, even like an emotional trauma. You can feel like if you have anger and, you can carry it in your jaw. Like think about it, your body stores stressors for years.
Yeah.
And so releasing some of that that's why I was saying when you're wearing a pulse oximeter and you're up at 99 and you're breathing 90% oxygen, and then all of a sudden we see a drop in your saturation. We haven't gone to altitude yet. You didn't do this, but that's not uncommon for me to see.
But when you're hyperoxygenating me, filling me with lots more oxygen, you'll see the pulse oximeter drop. You're saying? Oxygen drop.
That happens sometimes. And
what's the theory behind that?
Well, the theory behind that is that you're opening up some blood flow that hasn't been circulating, and so your body's going to rapidly respond and use this supplemental oxygen that you have access to, and so and that's going to differ depending on whether it's a vital organ, whether it's where it's going to work in the body. But and that's a little beyond my pay grade from an anatomy and physiology standpoint, because that's the mystery of the cardiovascular system. It's really complex. But in terms of detox potential, we always start it pretty slow, because you're just, from a fundamental standpoint, low oxygen environment, altitude, that's a hypoxic stress to the body. And what that causes the cardiovascular system to do is open. We need to move more blood to get
You're
nutrients.
tricking the body into saying, we don't have enough, we need to get more.
Yeah, so we're going to increase circulation. And so that's kind of a delivery mechanism to then flip the switch and while we have it open, let's flush oxygen through to those tissues.
Yeah.
And so people, like, I think of the altitude, the hypoxic training side as equally valuable as the oxygen, because it is the delivery system for the effect of the oxygen. You know, with just oxygen, you will get the effect of, you know, energy and reducing inflammation. But when you can open up, I mean, it's like the, what do you call it? The HOV lane. It's like all of a sudden this highway it's moving slow. You open up, you know, I'm blanking on what it's called, the fast track.
The fast track, yeah. HOV, you were right.
So you open up that lane, and now, you know, you're delivering much faster and moving things along that previously were at a standstill.
Yeah, and you know, it reminds me just when you were talking about the woman that you had who was the neck pain started. It just seems to me like she has all these things going on, who knows, right? And now that the body's given the right input, that it can, maybe she didn't have the nutrients or the availability because she had toxins and all this other stuff coming in. But now that you gave her that input with the oxygen, now the body's like, okay, cool, I can actually take care of this problem. I can actually send energy and nutrients and mitochondria to go deal with this, where I was in a deficit before. So I'm just in survival mode, you know, trying to just maintain what I can maintain. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about contrast therapy, that can apply to heat and cold, right? And so we're using the breathing environment. But if you think about what happens when you go into the cryo chamber here, down to negative 175 for 3 minutes, you're getting pretty extreme vasoconstriction.
Yeah.
Your body's drawing blood to the core and kind of in survival mode. And when you get out, you're getting vasodilation. You're warming back up. So all that blood that kind of returned to your core is being sent out, you know, to it recirculate. And so there's a contrast therapy that happens right there that is vasoconstriction, vasodilation. And if you think about like just the tone of your endothelial system, like there's this movement, this rapid expansion going back and forth from environments is assists with flexibility and adaptability. And so, you know, if you look into cardiovascular disease and conditions, oftentimes they talk about the stiffness of the arteries.
Yeah.
Like if you're sedentary, if you're sitting on the couch for years back to back, you lose some of the flexibility of the cardiovascular system. And so I listened to a podcast recently just all about the endothelium.
Yeah.
And they were actually talking about this as well.
Oh,
just, the effect of going back and forth as being such a positive stress on the body.
No, that's a great point. What about hyperbaric oxygen therapy? How do you think it's just different than this kind of exercise with oxygen therapy that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, HBOT, hyperbaric, they call it HBOT, is a really similar focus. The major difference is that it's a passive therapy. So unless you have these crazy huge chambers, I think I saw Tony Robbins in one where he was on a bike.
Of course, yeah.
But in general, there are chambers in which you go in and you sit, you lie down. So it's a passive therapy that enables people who can't exercise to, receive the benefits. But it's really calm. You're not getting a high heart rate. You're going in there, you're chilling out, and you're going into this pressurized environment.
Yeah.
And so the really high-end chambers that are the hard shell require medical supervision, or it's just a bit more of a process, and it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And also the time investment. You're going in there for at least an hour at a time, and usually you're on a 20, 30 session schedule, and you're trying to get it in, 3-4 times a week. Has been my understanding. And so it's a very different experience.
Depending what you're working on.
Yeah.
Like autoimmune or something.
Yeah.
Or concussion, I don't know.
Or wound healing.
Okay.
Wound healing, you might not be able to get on a bike and cycle if you're working on a wound on your leg, for example. And so it has a lot of great applications. And the other thing about HBOT, it's super well researched. And so it's become kind of a medical standard. It's not, people will argue just about anything, but it's pretty well established in that sense. This is a newer technology, and it's an active therapy. So, I always frame it as like we're doing a workout, and we're using that high heart rate and the supplemental oxygen to deliver a lot of the very same benefits as you would experience in HBOT. And some people, a lot of people prefer this because they didn't have success with HBOT.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't have a lot of personal experience with HBOT, and so I listen to podcasts and stuff about it all the time, learning everything I can about the differences. But ultimately, it comes down to something that's pretty hard to measure. The oxygenation of the blood plasma. So we put this on, and it shows us the percent of our hemoglobin, our red blood cells, that are saturated with oxygen. But this isn't measuring the oxygen content of the blood plasma, right? And so this measures it just because our blood changes.
And we're referring to the pulse oximeter, just for everyone who can't see.
The pulse oximeter shines a light and is measuring the reflection of the color of your blood, right? So when your blood is low oxygen, it changes color at a pretty consistent rate. So these can give us some good numbers on that, but the plasma side is where you can't just measure it by slipping something on your finger.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the differences are, and that's where I'm interested in talking more with doctors and hyperbaric specialists, and down the road getting more validation for how exercise with supplemental oxygen could drive a lot of the same effects, because people are getting results. That's the thing. Whether people that have undergone paralysis and stuff, they're reversing things that you're like,
you'd think it's impossible.
So anecdotally, it seems to be delivering many of the very same benefits, and sometimes even at an accelerated rate, because you are delivering with blood flow. And so those are kind of the differences. One's active, one's passive. They're both using high oxygen environments. We're using altitude to create a contrast. But even in hyperbaric, the interesting thing is you'll have people do contrast therapy within a hyperbaric chamber. And so they'll go from breathing concentrated oxygen to taking the mask off and then going back to some closer to room air.
Yeah.
And that contrast of 95% or greater oxygen down to 20 creates a response in the body that they're finding beneficial effects. So these are HBOT specialists doing contrast just from room air. Room air becomes the altitude.
Right.
And so they'll cycle that back and forth. And I've even heard hyperbaric specialists talk about when you go into a hyperbaric chamber and then get out, you're essentially going to altitude. You're in a more hypoxic environment.
Right.
And so just even if you go once a day, if you're going to hyperbaric once a day for 30 days, you're getting this kind of intermittent back and forth.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's pretty interesting stuff, but I think there's a lot more conversations about the spectrum of, there's soft shell chambers, hard shell chambers, and then there's EWOT. But it's a conversation that maybe hasn't been entertained enough, because people have said, hey, it's EWOT versus HBOT. It's this versus that. And it's like, hey,
they're both good.
Yeah.
It just depends what you want, right?
Yeah. It depends what you want. Depends what you're looking for. Depends if you want to get your workout into, like if I was taking an hour a day in my current schedule, it's like, when am I going to do my workout? Right? When am I going to get to move? And so to me, that's where in an active lifestyle, if you're able to exercise, I have 78-year-old clients who are, get on the bike and they go to altitude and they go for minutes at a time. And so if you're able to move and exercise, this is a really accessible way to get the benefits of oxygen therapies.
Yeah, that's what you're saying too. People like with knee injuries and stuff like that, they can jump on the bike, and that's low impact, it's easy, and they're still getting that cardiovascular, benefit in only like 15 minutes.
Yeah, and
so it's pretty cool.
Like you said, the impact to joints and muscles is just minimal because we let the altitude do the work. The altitude doesn't have to be a negative thing. Like if you go hiking, you're like, oh, this sucks. Like I can't do what I normally would do. We're on a stationary bike here. Where are you going? Like you're not going anywhere. The goal is to get the heart rate up, to feel good, and to, get those benefits. And so with that in mind, altitude, I always like to tell people altitude makes exercise easier. You can get there easier. Right? And so for people that are just looking for that feel good runner's high, like, hey, let's breathe through your nose. Let's go to altitude. when it gets stressful, we flip the switch and we stay in a nasal breathing pattern and welcome that refreshing breath of oxygen, and then go back to altitude when we're ready. But it doesn't have to be this big, stressful, extreme athlete type thing. No, it's like both make exercise easier. If you go to oxygen, you'll be able to produce more power on the bike. You'll see your wattage go up. Your average wattage will go up. Your heart rate will go down. You go to altitude, the opposite happens. So it's a toggle switch in which you can leverage the environment to suit whatever you're looking for.
You know, I would imagine this would be great for somebody with like TBI or concussions too, right?
Yeah, that's actually been a huge focus. I've worked with quite a few clients in that category, but you know, really, I follow quite a few like progressive concussion clinics around the country, and it's cool to see the traction of like, hey, maybe, you know, sitting in a dark room with earplugs, you know, or just isolation, darkness isn't necessarily the only way or the best way to recover from these things. Maybe there's solutions that include movement, and how do we leverage those toward healing? And I'm seeing more and more professionals kind of leaning in that direction. And so, yeah, if you can imagine someone who's undergone a concussion, suffered a concussion, and they can't take the movement of, you know, even standing up on a bike or running for sure, or even walking could be difficult. If you put on a bike and put a very low level of resistance, how much is my head moving?
Yeah, not at all.
I can hold on to the handlebars. I mean, I could wear sunglasses and I can just start engaging my heart and lungs. A brain bruise, right, is in a confined space, so that the pressure that comes along with some of those injuries, if we can relieve some brain inflammation from those bruises, they're seeing rapid recovery. I haven't dealt with really severe cases, but doing before and after tests like cognitive assessments, seeing rapid recoveries just because the way it's been explained to me is they're relieving that inflammation from the bruise. And so now you restore blood flow, it's like, hey, things can get back to their regenerative process. Whereas if like, hey, don't move, don't, you know, if you are in maybe a more traditional, like, don't move, don't get out, don't get your heart, just sit here and
atrophy.
Yeah, it's really, it makes a lot of sense that we could accelerate recovery times by blood flow and nutrients. And so, that's a pretty exciting element of it, because it is so unique that we can deliver a pretty intense workout just using the altitude air.
That's pretty cool. Hey, before I want to start talking about you know, some of the metabolic testing that you do. Before we go there, anything else that you want to talk about in terms of the bike or that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm working on right now is bringing this technology to the firefighter and first responder communities, because I think that
that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This technology I think is so relevant to performance, of course. The health of our first responders has an immediate impact on their ability to do their jobs, to save homes, save lives, but then also to save themselves in compromised situations. And so, you know, even in terms of mental clarity and cognition, those things are so vital for people that are in positions where they have to make decisions.
Split-second decisions.
Yeah, and they have to perform. And so for the firefighters, I mean, we're all experiencing the air quality. And, you know, there's days that I'll go out and walk my dog and it's like, it's going to be a short loop because I can feel it affecting my eyes and, you know, the back of my throat. You know, it's a toxic environment to be, you know, in that. And so guys going out for 2 to 3 weeks at a time to fight the wildfires, and they're wearing masks, but they're not always wearing a mask, right? And they're exposed to so much toxic fumes. I mean, if it's a residential area, then, you know, the building materials is a whole mix of chemicals in what's burning. If it's wildfires, it's still just heavy amounts of smoke. And then there's fire retardant chemicals, you know, dropping to try to slow this progress down. And so for me, that's just a population that really deserves our attention in the service that they're providing citizens. But then this is such a powerful way to regenerate the lungs. And so they might come home from, you know, 2-3 weeks out there, and want to get that workout, but like, yeah, it doesn't feel good to work out when you've got all this junk in your lungs. And so being able to use the altitude to maximize circulation, get that workout without having to go super hard yet.
Yeah.
And really fast track them toward recovery and performance. But, you know, as I did my research on the statistics around it, that, you know, line of duty deaths for firefighters are like 70% of line of duty deaths are cancer related.
Interesting.
And so, you know, early death because of cancer, because you're serving your community, to me is a situation that really doesn't make sense, you know? And so
it's not that noble, to be honest. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
it's noble what they do, right? But
I mean,
to know that, that you're guaranteed a death sentence almost.
I mean, 70%.
That's high.
That's, yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
If you look at there's a whole list of cancers that have been, there's a whole list of them, but that are most relevant to the firefighter population. The average increase was like 75% increase in getting that list of cancers for the when compared to the general population. Some of them up to like over 100. Like your risk is doubled because you're a firefighter. And so for me, you know, what I'm doing right now is I'm raising money to deliver this service to our local departments, and trying to pilot a movement of self-care for those guys and girls that are out there that are, you know, really just putting themselves in harm's way from a respiratory standpoint. And down the line, I'd love to see this adopted as part of a recovery protocol.
Yeah.
Like how regenerating the lungs and then, you know, sweating some of this stuff out. And so, you know, I've consulted with medical doctors who have used these modalities and have given me the background and like how to apply it. And it's really not different than anything I'm doing already, but having that, you know, as a back pocket assurance that I'm on the right path is really huge.
Yeah.
And so right now I'm looking to raise the money so that I can get, you know, put 20 guys through a 30-day experience in which they're coming in for 8 sessions and getting that kind of upgraded recovery experience. But regardless of whether it's on right after a bout out there with the fires, or if it's, you know, preparing, like that's equally as important, because the SCBAs that they're wearing, the mask and the tanks, is a very interesting breathing environment. I'm still learning more about that, and I have someone that's going to help me out by giving me an experience breathing in one. But if we can, like, they know how long they last in those, with that system. Yeah. Like, how much work can you do with a single tank? And so if we can boost their performance, that's going to be a really noticeable difference. And I want to be a part of, you know, helping kind of raise the stakes on firefighter performance, because I think that helps us all out. So
no, that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just starting out, and so if people are interested, I have a GoFundMe that you probably can throw in the links or something like that.
I'll definitely throw it in the show notes.
And so it's just starting out. It was actually an original part of my vision for Oxygen Rally. Kind of got shelved because I just was trying to, you know, build what the necessary infrastructure to running my day to day. But every year fires are an issue here in California, and so the first summer I got this, it was like, wow, people can't exercise outside, and we've got firefighters and homes burning down. So I'm really interested in collaborating with groups that, you know, would like to use this for themselves, but then, you know, also give back to help the people that are on the front lines.
Yeah, that's great.
And so whether you're a local cyclist and want to do this for yourself because you can't get out on the road or shouldn't be out on the road breathing all this smoke, or you're just interested in, you know, backing people that are on the front lines.
No, that's great.
So
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I think it's so cool.
I'm excited about it. It's been something that's been on my mind for a few years now, and finally pulling the trigger, and have connected with some great community members who have, you know, had a father that passed away early as a result of lung cancer. And so, you know, meeting people and talking to people that this is a part of their story. It's not just a statistic that I'm finding and, you know, repeating. It's like, hey, there's people in our community that are living out these situations and these consequences. The most dangerous part of being a firefighter, like 70% of line of duty deaths are cancer related. Like, the most dangerous thing is not out there in the blazes, it's your long-term health. And so that's pretty motivating for me to help that.
So instead of buying them a cup of coffee at Starbucks, go out and buy them a 3-pack session at Oxygen Rally, guys.
Well,
Go
I
do
mean,
that.
the thing is
Long-term benefits.
yeah, the long-term benefits, and hopefully it creates a trend. I think probably the younger, just our society is trending toward, health and wellness.
Yeah.
And so I think setting a precedent of like high functioning brain health, cardiovascular health, just a culture of health and performance, I think is really important. So the more we can get some traction with local departments, I think it starts to gain traction, I think, when you start kicking ass, right? And, that's why the metabolic testing has been an important part of what I do, because when we do 8 sessions, 10 sessions, and we measure, hey, not only do you feel better, you can feel your lungs kind of coming back to life, your capacity coming back, but we can show that like your VO2 max has made a jump and your fat burning efficiency has made a jump, and we can get real gold standard metrics on those things.
So talk to us about the metabolic
compelling.
testing. Like, why you were talking offline about this, and you were really saying like this is you get amazing data, and it really moves the needle for people when they can see and feel the difference. Why should people, or why are most people going to you for metabolic testing? I'm assuming they just want to lose weight, or what?
I mean, it's a complete mix. Fat loss is a huge motivator for just about everyone. I mean, everyone wants to lean out a little bit, or maybe they were looking to gain a little weight because, to balance out, optimize their body weight. But that's really relevant to most people. And so that's oftentimes an initial point of interest for high performance athletes. This is a technology that's been used in sports science labs for decades. It's, every Olympic, cyclist or triathlete is for sure has their metabolic test, and they're using that to dial in their nutrition, their seat position. This stuff has. So yeah, I mean, not to get too technical, I'm not an elite cyclist, but they use this even to say, hey, like, what is the metabolic consequence of my seat being a little higher or a little lower? Because you can see the efficiency by which they're able to sustain an effort over time. And so, so it
gets that technical.
It can. And so the applications are really limitless. We could throw you in an ice bath and see, how are you handling, 32 degrees? What is your metabolism doing? So you can experiment with that. The cool thing about it is this is the device right here. And so this encapsulates what, formerly was a full-on metabolic cart. And so we can throw this in a little backpack with a battery pack, and it's wired to a mask similar to the one you were wearing.
Yeah.
And that will sample the gases that you're expiring and give us a read on how you're using fats versus carbohydrates. But like I mentioned with the bike fit, it'll tell us things about your posture. Is your posture optimal? It'll tell you
pretty cool.
Your cognition, aerobic health, metabolic efficiency. All those things are reflected in how your body is adapting to stress. And so, like we talked about CO2, that's where this ties in. If you're really stressed out, you're probably producing more CO2 because you're burning more sugar, and your ventilation is going to change.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize how technical you could get by just the bike seat positioning. And like you said, are you performing at your max? Like, that's amazing for like these high level athletes, but I'm assuming just average Joe Blow, like I would just do it resting, like sitting on a chair, right? Like, do you do that?
Yeah, you get a basic, what they call an RMR, resting metabolic rate. And we don't even do it seated. We lay you down as if you're sleeping.
Yeah.
If you pull out your phone, you're probably going to affect that because you might get a stressful text, right? And that's going to change your heart rate, change your stress rate.
Or someone might not like your post on Facebook.
Yeah.
And like create that stress response.
Yeah, and so you change. That's the thing about everyday life. You're constantly in patterns of holding your breath or sighing as a response to how you're navigating your environment. So we put you on the bed and it's like, just zone out, act like you're sleeping, and we'll get a read of how your metabolism settles into that 10-minute rest period. And from that, you can extrapolate, how many calories you're using without activity. Now, the add-on to that is to do the exercise stress test, or a VO2 max test is what it's referred to oftentimes in performance. But essentially, it's an exercise stress test, and it gets as hard as you want it to get. But it's basically a ramp test, which starts super easy, almost boring easy, and then every minute it gets a little harder, no breaks until you tap out and can't continue. And so, ideally, you go as hard until you can't possibly go anymore.
Okay.
And that'll give us kind of the full spectrum of what you're capable of doing. And within that data, we can then say, all right, at what level of stress did you get to the point where your carbohydrate metabolism overtook your fat metabolism? And so that's one interesting point that we look at. It's called the crossover point. But we're just monitoring. I mean, and I printed these out that I was showing you before. Yeah. We're monitoring your kilocalories of fat being burnt versus your carbohydrate intake. And so we can see that over time. This is the duration of the workout. And so it's pretty cool. I mean, this is the raw data, so it's a bit technical and dense if you're not used to looking at it. But this gets sent to the data scientists at Pinoy, and they send back a report. And so now that report makes it much more consumable. It compares you to your gender and age and says, how do you compare in terms of aerobic health to your demographic? And it'll give you a rating, percentage rating 0 to 100%. And so we can look at that. It's all translated into the report, and then it'll customize recommendations. If your goal is fat loss, it's like, hey, your cardiovascular shape, it might be pretty good. You should be emphasizing strength a little bit more. And so it'll actually lean your report according to what your goal is. But the baseline metrics of comparing to the general population is not impacted by what your goal is.
Okay. So I would do this, and then when would I probably come back and do a second one?
Yeah,
what do you think?
It really depends on how intensely.
If I'm just trying to lose weight, let's just say.
Well, it depends on your patient's level. If you're like, hey, I'm going to crush it these 30 days. I'm ramping up all these different areas. I want to know how I'm doing in 30 days. Cool. Let's do like a 30-day challenge format. We could do 60 or 90-day challenge as well, and just say, hey, just putting a date out there, 90 days from now, I want to make progress in all these areas. That can be really nice accountability and validation. If you're doing something you've always done and it's a matter of getting the work done, that's one thing. But every 30 days might be relevant if you're, hey, I'm going to try this keto thing, and I want to make sure that it's actually working for me, because there's no one size fits all for diet or exercise. So let's check in 30 days in and assess how I'm responding. And then so people sometimes, do it more often on the outset of trying something new. Because, you could do this just for a diet change, not even for like, hey, I'm doing what I always do with training. Like that's already set. But I'm experimenting with different dietary lifestyle patterns.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool, man. This is awesome. Also, I know you're working on another project. Do you want to talk about that at all? Breath Lab?
Yeah, breathlab.io is at breathlab.io on Instagram is a platform that I'm working with a collaborator out of the New York City area. And we're basically trying to elevate the conversation around breath. And elevate, I don't say that like better than everyone else, but really just try to communicate at large by bringing in some of the world's leading experts on breath. And right now it's a monthly webinar, and we've done 4 so far, and they've just had amazing response.
Nice.
And so the last 3 was inhale was one, exhale, and then hold was kind of the series that we were on. And we just took a dive into, what is the nuance of the inhale? And we listened to, up to 5 different experts on the Zoom call with our audience of over 100, 150, I think over 200 at one point. People listening into the world's experts talking about the nuance of the inhale. What can we learn about how we manage our inhale? What can we learn then the next month? What is in the exhale that maybe we haven't thought of? And different experts sharing their experience. It's just super interesting. And so that's been something that's launched just since COVID, really. And
perfect timing.
Yeah, and it's really relevant. And it's been really fun to hear from these experts, and then to be able to kind of dive into the nuance of what they shared, because you're listening to these experts, and it's a lot to take in. But so we're looking on building also some programs for people to be a part of. One thing I'm going to be launching here pretty soon, hasn't been announced yet, but a sleep study experience.
Ooh.
For people to work on their sleep patterns. And you've probably seen the mouth tape.
Yeah.
That people wear. I mean, that was on Shark Tank. This nasal breathing thing is really starting to come mainstream, which is really cool.
Yeah.
If you read James Nestor's book,
Breathe, right?
Yeah, which is great. He was on the
Breath.
Breath.
What is it?
I think it's breath.
I think it's breath. Yeah.
He was on Joe Rogan podcast, and so things are. I mean, obviously, it's really relevant with respiratory health, but more and more men's health. GQ, like all these, major media outlets have something on breath work, have something on nasal breathing, and so it's really intensifying. The conversation around it is intensifying. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving people access to a new product. Like I said, you've seen the mouth tape stuff, but all the mouth tape on the market goes over your lips. That, if you're trying to tape your mouth shut, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But Patrick McKeown, author of Oxygen Advantage, created something called myotape, and myotape goes around your mouth. And so for all the people that are like, I'm not taping my mouth shut, are you crazy? Like, that sounds extreme. Well, what if we put tape around your mouth? It's basically a box. And so it goes around your lips. So if you wanted to take a drink, you could still take a drink. If you wanted, so it's
That's
really a very different thing, because when you...
So you're not wearing this to go to bed. You're wearing it like all day.
No, you're wearing it to go to bed.
Oh, okay.
They also have, you could wear it if you just wanted a reminder, if you were working at your desk or something like that.
Got it.
They have a version for kids, and that's the other thing. It can be accessible to kids now, because
cool.
The danger aspect is, completely different. And so, sometimes just putting the mouth tape on, he recommends it for kids for focus and cognition, just to be present, because that mouth breathing pattern, it really is not helpful for, he talks about, dental structure and face structure, and the book Breath goes into that as well. And so we're launching a 30-day challenge, sleep challenge, in which you get a pack of 90 strips of the myotape, and you get to wear them every night to bed. And
that's awesome.
I interviewed Patrick McKeown last week, and he introed the product and kind of gave us a bunch of tips for applying it to life and breathing practices to go along with it. And so we're going to be launching that really soon. So if people want to look out for that, be a part of that. It's sold. The myotape is sold out multiple times in Europe. Finally getting a shipment here to the U.S. And so I'm putting that order in today or tomorrow. But want to get that out to people October 1st. But if they want to be first, kind of on the leading edge of receiving that product, it hasn't even been formally set up for distribution here in the U.S. So we're trying to launch that as an experience through breathlab.io.
Nice. That's awesome. Before we go into the lightning round of questions that I like to ask all my guests, anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't talk about? Sorry, you're just about to take a glass of water. Whoops. Anything that we didn't cover, or you wish I had asked you?
No, I think maybe one of the one area that we didn't touch as much on was nasal breathing.
Yeah.
But that's been a huge aspect of my training process with the system. And I wouldn't...
Has it made you a better nasal breather? Is that what you're...
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, actually, and we didn't really touch about this on as far as my entrance into breath work and, discovering this technology. I am a pretty active person. I don't gravitate, I want to meditate, I want to be that type of person, but I've never installed it as a practice in my life, and same for breath work, until I discovered this, because I could get on a bike and do something I was familiar with and that felt good. I was exercising, and then I could flip a switch, and my attention immediately was on my breath. And I could still move my breath as much as I wanted to, but there's something different about the air. And so it dialed me into that body awareness, breath awareness. Can I keep going at this tempo? At what point do I have to switch? All these, these very present points of focus began to arise in my fitness routine. And so that was the game changer for me. Now I was aware of my breath when I wasn't on the bike, because how does that threshold feel in real life or in normal conditions? How about during this activity versus that activity?
Yeah.
And as I explored nasal breathing, I soon started attempting workouts completely in my nose. And I tried mouth taping. I read Oxygen Advantage, you know, early on in my journey, but then like I tried, like, let's go on a run and try the mouth taping thing. Cool. But I was more in a performance mindset. I was running and I wanted to demonstrate to myself that I'm making progress.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel good about how fast and, you know, like demonstrate my fitness to myself. Right.
Yep.
But
Totally makes sense.
once I got on the bike, like I said, I wasn't going anywhere. I was on a stationary bike. And it's like, all right, let's try this nasal breathing thing here. And by the way, when you go to altitude, it becomes even a little bit more difficult. Not in a resistance sense, really, but just it's thinner air. So it's like it brings your attention there immediately. And what when I would tape my mouth, I would you know, wouldn't be a half a mile and be like I want to go. And so it was like I would go. So I experimented with it, but once I got here, it gave me the patience to make a process out of it. And very soon I started getting on my bike, and I wasn't a cyclist before, but I started maybe I want to be a cyclist. I feel really good on the bike. I'm hitting this state that feels really good 20, 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
45 minutes I'm doing sessions and nose only, and my threshold is getting higher and higher. So now when I go out on a run, I was experiencing that I don't have to go slow anymore. I've expanded my capacity through my nose by increasing CO2 tolerance, oxygen efficiency, and even just mechanically understanding that I have to make a little bit of a different face if I'm at a high level of exertion to just the structure of my nose individually, to the point where, you know, I was cycling Mount Diablo, and I was able to cycle Mount Diablo at a pretty good pace and make it to the top just only breathing through my nose.
Wow.
Not that nasal breathing is everything, because if I really want to hit my max time, I probably want to mouth breathe at certain portions, right? And when I was trying to, you know, hit my best time, I would, but it was really interesting to know that I can hold 80 to 90% of my max heart rate for an hour and 15 breathing only through my nose. And seeing that change on the mountain, especially out on the road, it was like, all right, normally I would really start getting hard at 150 beats per minute. And then it's slowly 155. I'm fine. Up to one time, it was great because I forgot to wear my heart rate monitor, and I was up at 175, and I was listening to very meditative kind of track.
Yeah.
Because I don't like to pump up mix. Gets me that's more And
then
so
you start mouth breathing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was very ethereal type music, and I didn't have a heart rate monitor that I normally have on my bike monitor. So I actually was wearing.
Constantly be looking at it, right?
Yeah, I had the Whoop on. I was like, oh, let me just, as I'm keeping this tempo, let me just open the Whoop and see where I'm at. I was like, whoa, I'm at 175, and even just seeing that immediately triggered me back into whoa, can I keep it? And then my breath changed, and
of course,
eventually I was like, oh, I'm going to slow down and regain. But it was wow, I was just in the zone, heart rate 175, and climbing, and I was not stressing it. And so it was just cool, really cool to see that progress, and I would have never had the patience to just chip away at that if I hadn't had the presence of the altitude switch. And I shouldn't say I would never, but it definitely accelerated my process and my awareness.
I mean, I know for me, just when I was on it and you brought me up to that high altitude at 15,000 square feet, I had to be very cognizant of my breath. So you're right. I mean, I was really very cognizant of it. It was almost calculated breaths I was taking, and just very, just a lot of awareness and just making sure that I knew it was in a calm state, because I knew that if I wasn't, I was going to hyperventilate a lot quicker and burn out. So it's interesting that you say that. I mean, just from briefly doing it, I'm like, I could totally see how it makes you aware of the breath, you know.
Your breath and your thoughts. You start realizing that everything you do takes energy. Mm-hmm. So when you're on your bike and you're, holding a certain level of performance, your heart rate's at, a given level. And if a song comes on that I don't like, and I have to open an app to change it.
I hate that.
The rhythm of my breath changes, is interrupted because my movements are different, and because maybe I'm oh shoot, I missed it. And have a little stress moment of like, I want to get back to my tempo. But like those little interruptions, like change your performance, like change your breath. And even if I'm not opening, doing anything tech related, if I'm just on the bike and then I start thinking about like something going on in life, and it's like, and I can feel, it's really cool to start feeling that this stress, this thought pattern is changing the metabolic demand of the moment. And so that awareness really places a different emphasis on how you manage your thoughts and how you manage your focus when you're on the bike. And to me, that is meditation for me.
Yeah.
Like I'm back to the present moment, because the result of not being in the present moment is this 90% of your max heart rate through your nose all of a sudden starts getting really uncomfortable.
Yep. To
the point where like you're burning up, you're like, it changes everything. And so like getting to the edge there and really feeling that difference is really meditative and really rewarding for me to like get there in that way.
Yeah.
So.
No, I get it. I love it.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right. Hey, let's jump into the lightning round of questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. If the old you could see the new you, what would the new you say?
What would the new you me say?
Like what if you had to look at yourself where you are now and you were looking at your old self, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's not that long ago. Like really.
The old you was just a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
No, but I mean, in the constant evolution, it's like it's really not that long ago that I was stressed out working around the clock. I mean, it feels like a long time ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. And I think thinking on my feet, what would I say is like, I think diving into the breath has been a game changer for me, and doing it for me actively through activity, the aerobic exercise. Like I never had a relationship to that formerly.
Yeah.
It was like workout. It's like, I don't really want to do that. Like, can I chase a ball of some sort? Can we,
right.
Can we throw a Frisbee? And that still is like, that's the way I enjoy it most. But I've gained the interest and the patience to like start understanding that like I have an engine. Like I am an engine of some sort. Like we're all engines of some sort. And what type of engine do I want to be? And like, what is the expression of that day to day? And for me, it's like looking forward, like at 45, what kind of engine do I want to have? Because I see people that I really admire that I'm like, wow, like that's like, at the top of Mount Diablo, the people you meet up there is like a 70-year-old. He's like, yeah, I made it up here in like 59 minutes. And I'm just like when you're on the mountain and someone tells you like their time and you're like, yeah, you understand.
What's a good time? Like, I don't know. So like,
I mean, under an hour.
What do you do it in?
I think my best time was like an hour 11.
Wow.
Yeah, something like that. But I mean, I'm on a mountain bike, and that still has a little shock in it, and the tires, and so like, for me, I was competing against myself, so it didn't really matter.
Sure. But the guy's 70, you said, or something. Yeah. And you're 35, so there's something. Yeah. The guy's in good shape, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the people you see out on the road, they've got insane bikes, and they're really dialed in. He does it 2-3 times a week, and but it's just super impressive. Someone that's late 60s, 70s, like crushing it like that on the mountain. And, they've just dialed in their efficiency. I mean, it takes a long time. If you look at the difference between a good cyclist and an elite cyclist, it's like exponential. It's like if you have a seat like next to the NBA, like a what do you call it, courtside seat at the NBA. It's like, oh, this is different than, I haven't been courtside, but like
I haven't either.
The understanding of like, oh, that's how these guys are moving. That's how fast they are. That's how, compared to a high school basketball game or even a good college team, it's like the difference there is so incredible. So, but getting back to your question, I think it would just be a huge encouragement to like get connected to your engine, and start developing that. You don't have to get there fast, but get connected with it, because it is your living, breathing energy system that drives your perception of everything, your energy, your future, your legacy. And so for me, energizing myself via breath work, and then helping energize the reality of other people's mental and physical health is really a legacy play, so to speak. It's like that's what we're acting on. It's not just we're not changing the furniture. Like, hey, we should move this couch around. Like, this is bigger than that. So I think that would be my message.
Love it. What are some choices that made you who you are today?
Some choices. Definitely a big one was just doing what I love, and I think that was installed early on for me. In homeschooling, it was like, hey, you have to do a science project. What is it going to be about? And it was like, well, I want to go in the stream and I want to dig up the rocks in the stream bottom and figure out which mayflies, caddisflies, and black flies are making up the diet of the brown trout in the Yellow Breeches Creek. Like,
wow,
those kind of questions was like I was able to channel my interest, and then that's a legitimate science project, and understand water temperature and stream conditions and seasons and when they hatch and how the fish behave in response to all those variables. I was making decisions very early on that, like, doing what I loved, because being in that inspired state of just losing myself in like trying to understand the complexity of something like that, I think really has impacted how I pursue my career. It absolutely made me fall in love with teaching and volleyball in a new way. And then in this discovery has been a bit more personal, and started with doing it for myself and then sharing it with others. So yeah.
Love it, dude. That's awesome. Anybody from the biohacking, wellness, fitness community, anybody out there that you follow or that inspires you?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have impacted my journey. Most recently, a lot of them are in the breath space,
Yeah.
But in the holistic sense, I really appreciate Joe DiStefano. I don't know if you know his podcast, Stacked. He does a really good job and covers a lot of different.
Coach Joe D.
Yeah. So I really like his it's really grounded information. But then in the breath space, Brian McKenzie and the guys over at what is now Shift Adapt, Rob Wilson, I've loved their work, and a lot of what I do has been based on some of those principles. Trying to think of, but there's a lot of other people that I've, guys, like when we talk about nasal breathing, there's books like Breath. There's books like Patrick McKeown would be another big influence. But then there's also people like in Ayurvedic medicine, like Dr. John Douillard, and people that, you hear different, like in different references, they come up. But I've learned so much from these from
all of them.
Yeah. And so those might be some of the biggest current ones. I listen to a ton of podcasts.
Yeah, me too.
And those podcasts are jump off points for me to like then dive into research they mention, or other writers or doctors that they mention. Right now I've been so focused on building what I'm building that it's I haven't been doing as much reading as I like. But those are some of the major influences really in the breath space.
Yeah.
But it's been a lot of, right now there's so much out there, and filtering becomes a big issue. So I rely on.
That's why we ask, because you're an expert in that area. So that's why it's nice to like kind of lead people. Maybe.
Well, in terms of books, I think The Oxygen Advantage is a great book to kind of enter awareness around the breath. Breath by James Nestor is another really good one. It kind of functions in a lot of ways. It's very journalistic. It functions a lot in a lot of ways.
And he's a journalist. He's not a breath expert, but he seeks, I think, like all the best, right? Kind of.
Yeah, and you become an expert as you explore this in some way. And so I really appreciate his work, and it reminds me of like a Malcolm Gladwell type approach, and it's really a journey that you go through when reading that book. So in terms of exploring breath and realizing the deep impact it has on human physiology, and like we talked about cranial structure and evolution, I think that's a really that's created more conversations with my clients who are like, oh, I heard about this book, or I read it, or it really is an easy access point for people to get started.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Any rituals or like hacks or practices that you do on a daily basis that you kind of feel like gives you an edge? Some people use gratitude journaling.
Yeah.
For you, you're a high performer, man. Like, what do you do?
I'll comment on something breath-wise. For me, one of the simplest takeaways and principles, everyone's going to respond differently to different breath practices. So there's no one size fits all, but just if you take one thing away from and can change how you breathe during the day, would be breathe through your nose, right?
Yeah.
Unless you need to breathe through your mouth, breathe through your nose. And then the other thing would be extending the exhale. It's a simple thing that like, hey, anytime, and the more tuned in, you become to it, you realize that it has an immediate effect. So just, we've been told, hey, take a deep breath, and regardless of how we do that, how we release that breath has just such a huge impact on your state. And so like, I talk to people about this, and when we're training here, and very often it's like, even as I'm talking about it, I'm like, whoa, I feel like just a real shift in my state when I just say, hey, if we take a normal breath, and just that long extended exhale, doubling the length of your inhale in your exhale. So if you take 1 second in, takes 2 seconds out. If you take 3 seconds in, take 6 seconds out, is the simple framework to just extend the exhale. But really just any time, there's times where I'm so stressed that and I'm so busy, it's like for me to I should do like a break and do some breath work. But sometimes it's just like, hey, even counting is like too much cognitive, like I can't go there right now. But I can always go to extend the exhale. I can always just
nice.
And just demonstrate a little control that and the way I like to think about it and describe it is like, hey, right now in this moment, I have the luxury that I don't have to ventilate. Evolutionarily, like if I had to, I was in a performance survival situation, that's not a luxurious rest and digest recovery situation. But right now, I'm going to demonstrate to my physiology that I have the luxury of, even if I don't have cognitive safety because it's so, life chaos, I have safety in that moment. So for me, that's a really easy way to just ground myself and remind myself.
Yeah.
That's kind of a foundational thing for me. I enjoy cold exposure because of it changes my state pretty quickly. Changes anyone's state pretty quickly. But that's something that I use regularly here at the center. I have one of the freezers at home. I've had one of those for a few years that, I jump into when I have it cleaned, and, sometimes it goes on cycles and I have more interest than other times. But those two things are really foundational for me. Sleep is a big deal. I'm lucky enough right now that I'd never wake up with an alarm clock. I had to last week because, I got to bed late and I couldn't, I needed to, but I'm pretty regular and I always wake up at
when the sun rises.
Well, about 6 o'clock is, 5:30, 6 o'clock is usually when I'm waking up. And so it encourages me to go to bed early so that when that time comes, I'm getting up. And so I need to get even better at sleep because tend to be working late or just up late because I worked all day and then I want to, hang. And so sleep is a big one. And to me, with Oxygen Rally, breath is so foundational. I did lifestyle coaching, dietary stuff, helping people with that. But everyone breathes, and oxygen is so fundamental to aerobic life, and we're all aerobic organisms, right? And so to me, focusing on breath, focusing on sleep, those are kind of the foundations that I really focus on. And I dabble in a lot of other,
all that other
stuff.
Fun stuff. Yeah.
I did a lot of fasting, but that's not something I do now. I eat breakfast every single day right now.
Wow.
It's and I'm training differently, and it hasn't changed my body composition. People do things for all different reasons, but if I'm trying to get fit, for me, it's if I fasted, I was eating the calories later and it didn't really
matter.
Yeah. And so it's hey, let's get up and have some protein and make that a regular thing, see how that treats me. And if I'm going to fast, it usually is an early dinner, and then I let that, so that because I usually I'm hungry when I get up, and I think I feel better when just eating more regularly. For me, it's more just the foundation of it is hey, give it a 12-hour rest,
Yeah.
But even sometimes I'm not doing that. I try to. as much as I can. But
You're doing what works for you, which I love, and you're constantly aware of it. So there's no pressure, like you said. It's not like, are you performing or are you training? It's like, you have the luxury to like test and retest, and you're not going to be in the next competition 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now. So it's like, okay, life is a journey. We go through evolutions, I feel like, and now the evolution for you is protein in the morning. Maybe it won't be in next year, we don't know. So
and
I love that.
And I've thought even recently, like, let's do intermittent fasting again, because I did enjoy like aspects of that. But like I just retested myself with the metabolic test, and it was like even more than when I was cycling, like Mount Diablo training, extended training all the time. Like my VO2 max has continued to increase. I'm training less. I'm doing more kettlebell stuff. Like I'm doing more strength focus, but like I increased my VO2 max significantly. And I've actually been kind of like, geez, like I'm not training as much. Like I'm not doing as many sessions here. I'm still, a couple of times a week maybe, but it's like not, before I was like 4 or 5 days a week, and it was like, and I love it, but it's like, hey, I'm focusing on kettlebell stuff, some upper body strength. And it's like, it's cool to see that my progress is still like, that's probably what I needed.
Yeah.
And so it's just shifting and just trying to stay interested in what I'm doing for activity, but in life as well. So
yeah, love it, man.
Yeah.
Last but not least, where can people find you?
Oxygenrally.com is my website. I'm located at the Human Optimization Center, so HOCWC.com is where a lot of my stuff is. Unfortunately, my website is being censored by Facebook.
Wow.
And Instagram. So if you try to type oxygenrally.com into Facebook and share it, you won't be able to share it. And so I've been struggling trying to figure that out. So if you want to share it.
Oxygen Rally is a real provocative thing, that name.
I don't know,
really
I'm not, I don't know if it was the rally thing during COVID saying, hey, like a rally is a group of people gathering, or if it was oxygen as a training and health tool I don't make any health claims on my website, so I'm not really sure what that, and we don't have to go that direction, but at Oxygen Rally on Instagram, at breathlab.io on Instagram are the two outlets there, but you can find me at oxygenrally.com or HOCWC.com.
Nice.
And so.
Owen Monroy.
Yeah.
Muchísimas gracias.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.